Most people who feel financially behind imagine that the distance between them and a better life will be closed by one dramatic move. A raise, a lucky investment, a side business that suddenly takes off, a perfect budget, a month in which they finally become the disciplined person they have always promised themselves they would be. I do not believe that is how most financial lives improve. I have spent enough of my life around business markets, savers, borrowers, and strivers to know that the great dividing line is usually quieter than that. The people who become stronger over time rarely do so because they made one heroic move. Much more often, they made a series of small decisions that looked unimpressive in isolation and extraordinary only after enough time had passed. That is the part the world does not like to advertise. A dramatic turnaround is easier to sell than a quiet habit. A breakthrough makes a better headline than restraint. A shiny purchase is easier to notice than a growing reserve no one sees. But the arithmetic does not care what is photogenic. It rewards what is repeated. If you were sitting across from me and told me you wanted to be in a stronger financial position 12 months from now, I would not begin by asking which hot idea you should chase. I would ask a more revealing question: what small habits are currently shaping your money when no one is watching? Because that is where the truth lives. Not in the goals you announce, not in the version of yourself you describe to friends, not in the spreadsheet you build on a Sunday and abandon by Wednesday. The truth lives in the repeated pattern. The life you can actually sustain, the choices you make when no one is there to admire your self-control. I want to begin with one of the ugliest and most common traps in finance, because if you do not break it, many of the other good habits never survive. The trap is the status game. People rarely call it that. They call it normal life. A nicer car, a certain brand, a slightly bigger place, the holiday that photographs well, the phone that suggests you are current, the small, steady purchases whose true purpose is not function, but the management of how you feel relative to other people. It is a dangerous game because it never ends. The ladder keeps moving. You buy something that looks impressive until it becomes common. Then you need the next thing. Then the slightly rarer thing. Then the upgraded version. Then the neighborhood that says something. Then the school district that says something. Then the kitchen that says something. Then the holiday that says something. And if your financial identity is built that way, you are never really buying use. You are buying ranking. That is one of the most expensive addictions modern life offers. I have always preferred the quieter game, the wealth game. The wealth game is not very glamorous from the sidewalk. It does not always photograph well. No one walks into your home and gasps because you have 6 months of expenses set aside. No one congratulates you at dinner because your retirement accounts are well funded. Nobody on the internet can tell by looking at you whether you own low-cost index funds, whether your debts are under control, or whether your household could survive a surprise expense without panic. That is exactly why the wealth game is powerful. It is not a theater production. It is a structure. The person playing the status game keeps spending to feel secure in public. The person playing the wealth game keeps building security that can eventually create private freedom. That distinction matters more than most people realize. A person can look prosperous and still be economically frightened. A person can look ordinary and be building the conditions for a life with real options. I would rather have the options, not because I am above beauty or pleasure. I enjoy a good life as much as anyone. But I have never confused visible proof with durable strength. The world pushes hard in the opposite direction. It tells people to value what can be compared. The car can be compared. The house can be compared. The watch can be compared. The vacation can be compared. The life insurance cash value policy with high fees and bad liquidity that no one in the family fully understands can even be described as sophisticated. But none of that tells you whether the person owns freedom or merely rents the appearance of it. This is why one of the finest early financial habits is simply refusing to evaluate yourself by the public scoreboard. Once you stop doing that, a remarkable amount of foolish spending loses its emotional power. The second small habit that matters enormously is learning to notice progress before it becomes impressive. I think many decent people fail financially, not only because they make bad choices, but because they have trained themselves to ignore good choices, unless the result is large enough to feel dramatic. Paid off a credit card, not a big enough deal. Went 1 month without overdrafting, should have happened years ago. Saved the first $1,000. Still too far from where I should be. Increased the retirement contribution by a small percentage. Nice. But other people are already ahead. That style of thinking is poison. It moves the goalpost every time you get closer. It teaches the mind that nothing counts until the finish line arrives. But the finish line is built from counted steps. I learned long ago that motivation is not sustained by gigantic outcomes alone. People keep going when they can feel progress, not imagined eventual progress. Actual visible evidence that movement is occurring. A business owner feels it when customer count rises. An investor feels it when retained earnings accumulate. A saver feels it when the first real reserve sits in the account and does not get consumed immediately. This is why I like the habit of recording wins. Not performatively, not online, for yourself. A small notebook, a private file, a place where each month you write down a few things that improved. Maybe you resisted a bad purchase. Maybe you canceled something wasteful. Maybe you raised your savings rate. Maybe you finally looked at the numbers instead of avoiding them. Maybe you transferred money into an emergency fund 3 times in a row without interruption. These things matter. The person who acknowledges them is building evidence. Evidence that he can change. Evidence that progress is occurring. Evidence that his financial identity is no longer entirely controlled by his past. I wish more people understood that confidence in money is often built backward. People think confidence arrives after huge success. In reality, the ability to keep going usually comes from smaller repeated moments that prove to you that you are not as stuck as you feared. The third habit is learning to think in decades instead of days. This one changes almost everything. A great many financial problems are really time horizon problems disguised as discipline problems. People want money to produce emotional relief immediately. They want to feel different after a month or two of good behavior. They want proof that the sacrifice matters now. When the proof arrives slowly, they assume the system is not working. That is a childish way to look at compounding. The first years of anything worthwhile are usually quiet. The first dollars saved feel insignificant. The first year of investing looks almost disrespectfully small compared to the effort it required. The first side income stream may be embarrassing in size. The first stretch of living below your means may feel like all restraint and no visible reward. That does not mean the path is weak. It means the machine is still small. I have often found that people who become financially strong are not always more brilliant than the rest. They are simply more willing to live inside a longer time horizon. They stop asking what can happen for me this week and start asking what repeated action, if sustained for 10 years, would change my position completely. That question is far more powerful. A person who thinks only in months gives up easily. A person who thinks in years can tolerate the awkward stage. A person who thinks in decades begins making decisions that no longer require immediate applause. And once that shift happens, patience stops feeling passive. I remember being young and feeling, as many people do, that progress was too slow to deserve confidence. But slow is not the same as wrong. Many of the best outcomes in business and investing are built by things that look unimpressive until suddenly they do not. A person who invests a modest amount consistently for 10 years is not competing with the same field as the person who starts and stops every time emotion. A person who learns one valuable skill deeply for several years is not competing with the same field as the person who samples 20 things and masters none. A household that steadily raises its savings rate is not playing the same game as a household waiting for one perfect year. This is what I want you to hear. Short-term frustration is not evidence that the long-term path is poor. It is often simply the admission price, the fourth habit. And one that sounds boring, because it is boring, is knowing your numbers well enough that money stops being missed and becomes a visible machine. You would be surprised how many adults are trying to build a better financial life while remaining curiously vague about what actually comes in, what actually goes out, what they owe, what their fixed obligations are, and what remains after the month has finished consuming them. They know roughly. Roughly is not enough. Roughly keeps people confused. Roughly allows the mind to invent stories. Roughly makes it easy to say, I think I am doing okay, or I think I cannot save, or I think I need more income, when the truth may be something else entirely. I have always preferred paper to anxiety. Write it down. Income, after-tax rent or mortgage, utilities, insurance, debt payments, food, transportation, subscriptions, childcare, if it applies, everything, do not perform. Do not tidy the numbers up because you are ashamed of what one category might reveal. Shame is useless in arithmetic. Clarity is useful. Once the truth is visible, you can start asking adult questions. Are we actually living below our means? Where are the leaks? Which costs are fixed and which are habits? What would happen if one income were interrupted? How much of our spending is maintenance, and how much is emotional self-soothing? What does a normal month really require? This matters because financial health is not built on slogans. It is built on understanding your own machine. A household that knows its numbers can make calm decisions. A household that avoids its numbers is ruled by mood. Mood is a terrible treasurer. People say they want freedom, but freedom begins with measurement. A business without bookkeeping is not being creative. It is being reckless. A household that wants to improve must treat visibility as one of the first disciplines. The fifth habit is building an emergency buffer and treating it with the respect it deserves. I do not care how clever someone sounds about investments if his household cannot absorb a basic shock. That is not sophistication. That is fragility with a nice vocabulary. The emergency buffer is not there because life is dramatic every week. It is there because life does not ask your permission before it becomes expensive. The car fails, the boiler breaks, the job becomes uncertain, the child needs something now, travel becomes necessary when you did not plan it. The market falls at the same time you need cash. These things are not rare enough to ignore. Yet millions of people behave as though the absence of a reserve is normal. It may be common. It is not wise. The beauty of an emergency fund is not only that it pays the bill, it protects judgment. Without it, every surprise becomes a crisis. With it, some crises become inconvenience. That is a profound shift. A household with 1 month of true expenses set aside is in a different emotional position from a household with nothing. A household with 3 months is different again. A household with 6 months begins to feel something many people do not feel often enough. Room to think, room to choose, room not to grab the first bad option in a moment of pressure. I do not think people celebrate this enough because reserves are invisible, but they buy something more valuable than status. They buy peace. A person who knows he can absorb a hit behaves differently in negotiations, in work, in investing, in family life, and in ordinary daily mood. The sixth habit is automating what matters before life has a chance to spend it. I have long liked the principle that saving should not be the leftover act. It should be the early act. What remains after that is what you truly have to spend. This is one of the simplest changes that can transform a household because it removes the requirement for constant heroic self-control. If you wait until the end of the month to see what is left, you are placing your future in competition with convenience, appetite, and fatigue. The future loses that contest more often than people admit. Set the transfer, let the money move automatically. Emergency fund, investment account, retirement account, debt overpayment. If that is the urgent problem, do not wait for the mood. Do not negotiate with yourself every month. Decision fatigue is real. Systems protect people from themselves. I have never believed the highest form of discipline is constant emotional strain. The best discipline often looks quieter than that. It looks like architecture. The important choices are made once, then the machinery keeps carrying them forward while life goes on. This is what good businesses do. They systematize what matters. A household should do the same. The habit of automatic saving also creates another advantage. It lowers the emotional temperature of spending. When the important transfer has already happened, there is less room to accidentally spend the future and then feel guilty afterward. That does not solve every problem, but it removes one of the most common excuses people use for staying disorganized. The seventh habit is building more than one source of strength. People often phrase this as multiple income streams, which is fine as far as it goes, but I think it is slightly broader than that. The core idea is not that everyone must become a frantic collector of side hustles. The real idea is that dependence on one narrow source of money can be dangerous. If all household stability depends on one employer, one role, one industry, one salary, and one set of assumptions about continued demand, then the system may be thinner than it appears. I am not suggesting theatrical diversification for its own sake. I am suggesting resilience. That may mean investment income. It may mean a spouse's separate earning power. It may mean learning a skill that can create freelance revenue. It may mean building a small business slowly. It may mean simple ownership of productive assets that produce cash. It may mean developing capabilities that make a job loss less catastrophic because you are not starting from zero. The people I admire financially are rarely relying on one lever alone. They build optionality. A person with investment income, marketable skills, a reserve, and reasonable expenses is far harder to corner than a person with only a salary and a lifestyle designed to consume it entirely. This does not happen overnight, and it should not be approached with frantic energy. Most people ruin good plans by trying to do everything at once. Better to build slowly and sanely. One asset, one skill, one new source of resilience, then another when the first is stable. The eighth habit is refusing to care too much about opinions that do not improve your life. This one sounds soft. It is not. A great deal of financial ruin is social. People do not buy only because they need the thing. They buy because they are trying to avoid the feeling of being judged. They keep the house because of family optics. They keep the expensive routine because of colleague optics. They avoid investing because their peers think it is boring. They avoid taking a business risk because people might laugh if it fails. They do not downsize because it will look like decline. They do not take the job they want because it pays in a way others might not admire. This is idiotic, and I do not use that word lightly. To build a sound financial life, you must eventually decide whose opinion is important enough to deserve influence. Most people give far too much authority to casual observers who do not pay their bills, do not understand their goals, and will not be present when the financial consequences arrive. The person who can reduce this noise gains an enormous edge. He can save without embarrassment. He can invest without needing fashionable stories. He can say no. He can simplify. He can live according to function rather than display. He can move toward what actually matters to him instead of maintaining a life that exists as public theater. That is a very large advantage. The ninth habit is investing in yourself with the same seriousness people reserve for external assets. I have always believed this deeply. Stocks can do well, businesses can do well, real estate can do well, but the highest returning investment available to many people is the one that changes their earning power, judgment, health, and usefulness, better skills, better communication, better negotiation, better writing, better salesmanship, better understanding of business, better physical condition, better emotional stability, better capacity to focus. These things compound. The market may fluctuate. The real estate cycle may fluctuate. Your own improved capability travels with you. It affects what you can earn, what you can build, what you can withstand, and how wisely you behave. I think the public often separates finance from the rest of life too sharply. Physical health matters financially because fatigue leads to worse choices, shorter horizons, and thinner resilience. Mental clarity matters financially because confusion creates procrastination. And procrastination is expensive. Character matters financially because a person who cannot delay gratification will sabotage almost any income level eventually. This is why the best financial habits do not live only in the bank account. They live in the life. A person who sleeps properly, learns continuously, manages his mind, and improves his usefulness is usually doing much more than self-help. He is increasing the long-term quality of his capital allocation. Now, if all of this sounds like a long list, let me make the deeper point clear. You do not need to transform everything at once. That is another lie people tell themselves. They imagine that financial improvement requires a new identity all at once, a perfect year, a dramatic reset. Usually it requires choosing one or two habits and repeating them until they become normal. Stop playing the status game, begin noticing progress. Think longer, know your numbers. Build a reserve, automate the transfer, create another source of resilience. Care less about casual opinion, invest in yourself. If a person did only some of these with consistency, he would likely be in a stronger position 12 months from now. If he did them for several years, the difference could become very large indeed. The reason small habits matter so much is that they do not only change the balance sheet, they change identity. The person who measures his success quietly rather than socially becomes calmer. The person who notices progress becomes more motivated. The person who thinks in decades becomes more patient. The person who knows his numbers becomes less afraid. The person with a reserve becomes less fragile. The person with automation becomes less dependent on mood. The person with multiple sources of strength becomes less trapped. The person free of casual opinion becomes harder to manipulate. The person invested in himself becomes more valuable. That is not a list of tricks. That is a redesign of who the person is around money. And that, in the end, is what changes outcomes. I knew a man who once believed the answer to all his money problems was simply earning more. Each time income rose, life rose with it. Better car, better holidays, better restaurants, better things, better evidence that he was keeping up. He was not reckless in the dramatic sense. He was culturally normal, which is to say he was in danger. The more he played the status game, the less progress felt real because it was all being used to maintain public proof. Another person I knew made less, at least at first, but she played a different game. She tracked carefully, saved automatically, built a reserve slowly, learned constantly, improved her skills, took pride in small wins, ignored much of what her peers thought was important. A few years later, the difference between them was no longer subtle. One looked prosperous, the other was becoming free. I know which result interests. Let me also say something to the person who feels behind. That feeling is one of the great destroyers of intelligent action. Feeling behind can make people do theatrical things. They speculate, they overspend to feel normal. They start giant plans they cannot sustain. They compare themselves to polished projections and then decide that because they are far from the ideal, small steps do not count. That is nonsense. Small steps are often the only steps that count because they are the ones repeated long enough to alter the machine. You do not need a cinematic financial breakthrough. You need a better pattern. You need a life in which the quiet decisions are helping you instead of hurting you. This is one of the reasons I dislike so much of the modern money conversation. It is too obsessed with hacks and not obsessed enough with habits. Hacks are fragile. Habits compound. A hack may save you a little once. A habit may save you, earn you, or protect you for a decade. If you ask me what I would want for an ordinary household over the next year, I would not ask for brilliance. I would ask for steadiness, a little less status anxiety, a little more evidence tracking, a longer time horizon, better visibility, a growing reserve, automatic transfers, one more source of resilience, less social obedience, more self-investment. That would be enough to create real change. Not change that impresses the internet, change that makes the household stronger. And strength in finance is vastly underrated. A strong household can absorb noise without losing itself. A strong household can ignore fads. A strong household can buy time when life becomes expensive. A strong household can make decisions from judgment instead of panic. That is what I would rather have than almost any flashy story. There is another benefit to small habits that is easy to overlook. They tend to spill over into physical, emotional, and mental life. The person who stops playing the status game usually becomes less agitated. The person who records wins often becomes less self-punishing. The person who thinks in decades becomes less frantic. The person who knows his numbers sleeps better. The person with a reserve feels less cornered. The person who automates important transfers experiences less monthly guilt. The person who invests in herself becomes more confident. Finance is never only finance. It is a way of arranging life. The numbers matter, yes. But the numbers are shaped by behavior, and behavior is shaped by belief, environment, and identity. This is why I have never thought of money only as mathematics. It is moral in the broad sense of the word. It reflects what you value, what you fear, what you compare, what you tolerate, and what kind of future you believe you deserve. If you value status, the numbers will show it. If you value freedom, the numbers will eventually show that too. If you live by comparison, the numbers will live under pressure. If you live by quiet purpose, the numbers often begin aligning accordingly. This is a serious matter because the habits you repeat this year are not only moving money around, they are shaping the kind of person who will make your money decisions next year. That is what compounding really is. Not only returns on capital, returns on identity. A better identity around money creates better choices. Better choices create better conditions. Better conditions reinforce better identity. The cycle can run upward just as surely as it can run downward. So I would not ask you to become a new person overnight. I would ask you to choose the smallest wise change you can actually repeat. Maybe you stop buying for status. Maybe you track one financial win a week. Maybe you think in 10-year blocks instead of monthly frustration. Maybe you open the accounts and list the numbers. Honestly, maybe you start the emergency fund. Maybe you automate one transfer. Maybe you begin building another source of resilience. Maybe you stop asking permission from people whose opinions are costing you money. Maybe you enroll in a course. Read a serious book. Practice a marketable skill. Sleep better. And treat your own capability as an asset worthy of investment. Then you do it again, then again, then again. That is how people get ahead. Not all at once, not by accident. By allowing small wise behaviors to compound quietly until the life looks different. The people who are financially thriving are rarely superhuman. Usually they are simply less distracted, less performative, more deliberate, and more willing to repeat what works after the novelty has gone. That may not sound glamorous. Good. Glamour has emptied enough wallets already. I am interested in something quieter, a life in which money becomes less of a source of fear, performance, and noise, and more of a tool that supports choice, peace, and useful. That kind of life is built in habits. And habits, if chosen well, can change almost everything.